Heroku Postgres incident, a DevOps Postmortem. It was 15:47 UTC on April 26, 2022, and the silence of a routine afternoon was shattered by a wave of connection failures rippling across the Heroku Postgres infrastructure. Within minutes, the silent backend components started screaming. This wasn't just a minor hiccup. It was a cascading failure hitting not only Postgres but also critical downstream services like Heroku Data for Redis and Apache Kafka. For hours, developers were staring at broken pipes and unreachable databases, watching their production environments grind to a halt as the network layers buckled under an unexpected behavior from a routine update. By 16:03 UTC, the first mitigation steps were being scrambled into place, but the damage was already spreading across a subset of critical databases. The scale of the impact was looming large, and for anyone relying on these data services, the clock was ticking toward a total blackout of their core functionality. Picture this: it's April 26, 2022, and you're running a production app on Heroku. For thousands of developers, Heroku Postgres isn't just some database. It's the backbone of their entire stack, holding everything from user profiles to transaction logs. When things go south here, the whole house of cards falls over. At 15:47 UTC, that house started shaking. This wasn't just a minor glitch in one niche app. It was a systemic failure hitting Heroku Postgres and cascading into critical neighbors like Heroku Data and Apache Kafka. When your primary database stops talking to your cache or your message broker, the application effectively goes deaf and mute. For several hours, developers across the globe were staring at connection errors while their services ground to a halt. It wasn't just an outage. It was a fundamental breakdown of the infrastructure that kept thousands of businesses online. It was a standard afternoon on April 26, 2022, and for most of the world, things were running smoothly. The infrastructure was stable, and the routine hum of data moving through Heroku Postgres felt like background noise, the kind of silence you only notice when it suddenly stops. Then came the update. It wasn't a frantic hotfix or a desperate patch. It was just a routine infrastructure update to a networking component. On paper, it was supposed to be standard maintenance, nothing that should have set off any alarms. But as the deployment moved through the systems, that specific networking component began exhibiting some very unexpected behaviors. It started small, but it was already poisoning the well for a subset of databases and downstream services like Heroku Data for Redis and Apache Kafka. By 15:47 UTC, the quiet was over. The first cracks were appearing in the foundation, and the storm was officially moving in. It was April 26, 2022, and the clock hit 15:47 UTC when the first cracks started to show in the infrastructure. For a subset of Heroku Postgres databases, the world just stopped turning. It wasn't a slow fade. It was a sudden wall of connection failures that rippled outward, hitting not just the primary databases, but knocking out associated services like Heroku Data for Redis and Apache Kafka. The engineers on call didn't see a gradual spike in latency. They saw a systematic collapse of connectivity. By the time they were staring at the monitors, the networking component involved in a routine infrastructure update was behaving in ways it was never designed to do. It was the kind of unexpected behavior that keeps you up at night, where the tools you rely on for stability suddenly become the source of the chaos. The first few minutes were pure triage as they realized the scope was expanding. It started at 15:47 UTC on April 26, 2022, when the first tremors hit the infrastructure. What began as a routine update to a networking component didn't just glitch, it metastasized. The failure didn't stay contained within Heroku Postgres. It bled outward like a toxin into the surrounding ecosystem. By the time the team started digging in at 16:03 UTC, the rot had already compromised connected services, including Heroku Data for Redis and Apache Kafka. It was a classic domino effect, where one faulty component triggered a web of connection failures across multiple platforms. The cascade wasn't just a single service going down, it was a web of dependencies snapping in sequence. Even as they pinpointed the networking issue at 1700 UTC, the sheer scope of the interconnected failures meant that restoring connectivity would be a slow, grinding crawl back to normalcy through the wreckage. So, we dig into the guts of the system to find out what actually broke the gears. It wasn't a rogue query or a spike in traffic. It was something much more insidious. The culprit was a specific networking component that had been introduced during a routine infrastructure update. This piece of the stack started behaving unpredictably, creating a wall between the databases and the applications trying to reach them. By 1700 UTC on April 26, the team pinpointed this exact component as the source of the chaos. It didn't just glitch, it effectively severed connections for a subset of Heroku Postgres instances, dragging down dependent services like Heroku Data for Redis and Apache Kafka along with them. It was a classic case of a standard update containing a hidden poison pill in the networking layer, turning a routine maintenance task into a multi-hour connectivity blackout. When the smoke cleared, we had a pretty clear picture of the wreckage. This wasn't just a minor hiccup. It was a multi-service meltdown that hit a significant subset of Heroku Postgres databases and their associated data layers. We're talking about core infrastructure like Heroku Data for Redis and Apache Kafka getting caught in the crossfire. The chaos started at 15:40 on UTC on April 26, 2022, and it didn't just flicker, it dragged on for hours of connectivity failures. While the team scrambled to find the ghost in the networking component, a whole swath of users were left staring at broken connections. It took until 20 UTC to get the majority of services back online, with full restoration finally hitting at midnight. In the world of production data, several hours of downtime isn't just a metric, it's a frantic, high-stakes scramble to keep the lights from going out completely. The alarms started screaming at 15:47 UTC on April 26, and suddenly, the floor was falling out from under the database layer. It wasn't a total blackout, but it was a surgical strike. A subset of Heroku Postgres databases and associated services like Data for Redis and Apache Kafka were just dropping off the map. By 16:03 UTC, the team was already in the trenches, scrambling to implement initial mitigation steps as connectivity flickered like a dying light bulb. The real breakthrough came at 1700 UTC when they pinned the ghost in the machine. A networking component from a routine infrastructure update had gone rogue. It was a high-pressure hunt through the stack until 1730 UTC, when they finally began rolling back that specific component. By 2000 UTC, the majority of services were crawling back to life, and by midnight on April 27, the dust finally settled. By 1700 UTC, the team finally pinned the ghost in the machine to a specific networking component, one that had behaved like a landmine following a routine infrastructure update. It wasn't just some vague glitch, it was a fundamental failure of the network layer, causing massive connection drops for Heroku Postgres and downstream services like Data for Redis and Apache Kafka. The fix was surgical. They rolled back that specific, malfunctioning networking component to its previous stable state. This rollback started the restoration process at 1730 UTC, slowly stitching the broken connections back together. By 2000 UTC, the majority of services were back online, and by midnight on April 27th, every single service was fully restored. To keep this from becoming a recurring nightmare, They tightened the guardrails around infrastructure updates, ensuring that these specific networking components are no longer deployed without rigorous validation before hitting production. Look, we've all had those "why did I just do that?" moments, but the real takeaway here isn't just about a bad deployment, it's about the hidden fragility of shared infrastructure. When that networking component started acting up during a routine update on April 26, it didn't just hit one service, it cascaded into Heroku Data for Redis and Apache Kafka as well. The lesson is clear: when your core networking layer is involved, routine is a dangerous word. You have to assume that any change to the underlying fabric can ripple outward in ways you haven't mapped out yet. By the time they pinpointed the issue at 1700 UTC, the blast radius was already well established. It's a stark reminder to build for isolation. If one faulty component can knock out multiple downstream data services simultaneously, your boundaries aren't deep enough. Trust is great, but in production, you need guardrails that assume the next update might just break the world. That's how Heroku turned a very bad day into a lesson. If this saved you an outage, subscribe for the next postmortem.